Hey everybody, welcome back to the Homestead. Today we're going to be talking about the first 5-ish steps to starting an off-grid homestead. The reason I say ish is because it's just from our own experience. These are the first 5 things that we would recommend, and then obviously we know that different people have different circumstances, so it's not going to be for everybody, but these are the first 5 things that we would generally recommend. And make sure you stay tuned till the end, because we're going to give an update on how Joshua and Nathan's plots are coming. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing for setting up an off-grid homestead, well, obviously you first have to have land. But after you have land, first step would be to put in driveways, trails, pathways, so you can access portions of your property and homestead that will be visited frequently and need to be maintained. Alright, so Josh, what are some ideas of things you could consider when putting in a driveway or driveways and accessing different parts of your property?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, I'm not a professional by any means, but I got to get a bit of experience because we recently put in a large driveway and hired out people to do the machine work, but I kind of managed all of the stuff and did a bunch of the research. So I would say one of the main things I learned, like especially with when you're originally laying out your driveway, is angles, like how sharp you're making the turns. I would say that's a big thing because especially if you're going to later on have like a cement truck or truck and trailer coming up there, you want to make sure your turns aren't too sharp, that they can make those turns. Especially if you're going to have like fence line right on the edge of the driveway, or maybe you have some large trees going to be right on the edge of your driveway. Because if those objects aren't there, they can just pull off the road if necessary. But if those things are there, you got to really make sure that that truck can make that turn and stay within the driveway. After that, like we did a gravel driveway. Obviously it's different if you have the finances to do something paved. I don't know a whole lot about that at all. But we did gravel, and there's different things you can do to kind of help the gravel not to sink. Because typically the gravel, especially somewhere in Missouri where you'll get like heavy rains, you'll get frost and stuff, the gravel sinks really quick into the ground. So using a larger rock as a base, we went with a 2 to 4 inch rock, and that helps the rock not to sink in quite so fast because it gives just a larger base and kind of holds it together a bit better. You can also do landscaping fabric underneath. We didn't do that because of the expense. It seems like in some areas it can do pretty good and help out for some time because that will help the gravel not to sink in quite so fast because there's that barrier down there. And then it also stops weeds from coming up through the gravel that brings soil and material up to the surface, which also causes the gravel to get buried. So that can help. It can cause some issues if you're building in an area where it's heavily moist, because it kind of get muddy underneath that, and that kind of gets knotted up sometimes, at least what I've heard. So you got to be a little bit aware of that, but I think that can help in certain situations as well. I'm also getting experience with, hopefully here soon, putting in a concrete bridge, or I think the more technical term is an unvented ford. I know that's a more rare situation, so probably not many people are going to deal with that. But if you do have a creek crossing, just thinking about what type of machinery ultimately you need to bring across. You have to bring a concrete truck across. That's pretty much the heaviest weight. Making sure you build something that can handle that sort of weight. I think a big thing comes down to looking down and watching the water flow of the creek, especially here in Missouri in the rainy season. We get heavy water flow, just to see how far the water makes it up on the banks, how hard the flow is, how many trees and stuff you have coming down the creek, to then properly design a bridge sufficient for what you got. I went ahead and went with a low water crossing. So basically the water all year round will just run over it, because for most of the year our creek is low enough where I can still just totally drive through that water, but then it makes when the water rises up really high, it just flows over it and most likely will not cause any damage to it or anything like that. So of course I won't be able to get out when the water is flowing really hard, and that's the downside, but I just don't have the finances built up to be able to build a full-on over the water bridge. So it would be the other option. So that's what I went ahead and went with. And then you can do a like vented ford. It's like a concrete bridge. And if you don't know what I mean by a concrete bridge, it's almost like a slab that just makes a way through the water for your vehicle to go on. So some of them are kind of lifted up a bit and the water for most of the year will run through like culverts. So it's really thick concrete, pretty thick concrete. And then the water will run through these culverts, but when heavy rains come and it starts flowing really hard, then it'll run over it as well. Or the other way is to do a low water crossing where it just runs over it all year round because it's kind of down and in kind of the creek bed. So I went ahead and went with the low water crossing because when you do a concrete bridge or a vented ford, it rises the water level when it's higher up like that, because basically now you've got a block. It's almost like a dam to a degree, that whenever the water gets flowing really hard and is not going to just flow through those culverts, it raises up the water level, and then all of a sudden you can have more dig out issues around it. As the water comes up over the bridge, it has a steeper and longer drop to go down, and actually digs out and can totally dig out and mess up the bridge sometimes, even because it digs out on the downhill or the downflow side of the bridge. It'll do a lot of digging out and tear out a lot of material there. Yeah, willing, gonna go with a low water crossing that causes just the least disturbance as possible. So at least my thinking with that. As far as pathways, that's one we have yet to figure out the best solutions, because you can do concrete pathways. That's obviously, like, as far as just walkways is what I'm talking about right now. You can do concrete pathways. That is great because it's pretty permanent. Weeds won't make it through it. It's easy to keep it clean. Challenge is, especially for starting a homestead, sometimes you put a pathway somewhere you think you want it and then realize you want to adjust stuff. And then if you put a concrete pathway in, now it's kind of a pain to move it. So I would say concrete pathways are great. You just have to do some planning and make sure you're putting it down where you want it. We also have done pea gravel pathways in our garden. You can lay down like vinyl or cardboard or just some sort of weed bearing material underneath, and then put pea gravel on top of that, and that seems to work pretty well. It is still more temporary, but it makes a pretty nice pathway, at least for a while. We did learn that weed fabric does not work very well, at least here, because we just have such crazy weeds. And maybe it's because of the rain too, because when you get the heavy rains, it washes a lot of soil everywhere and puts it on top of the weed fabric, and then allows weeds to grow down in, and they'll still grow down right in through that weed fabric. And then when you pull those weeds up, it makes a big hole in the weed fabric often. So we've not had the best success with that. Maybe there's a more high quality weed fabric you can get or something, but we have not had the best experience with weed fabric. And then other than those things, I don't know, I'm sure there's more things we've learned over the years, but I'm not remembering right this moment. Those are my biggest tips for y'all though.
Cool, thank you, Josh.
Welcome.
Alright, so step 2, we would recommend actually getting grid power. And I know this might kind of seem a little bit counterintuitive, but unless you have the finances to set up your housing and all your infrastructure, and set up, if you're going to have alternative energy like a solar system, unless you have the finances to be able to set up a solar system that runs really well, and or set up completely off-grid systems that work, if you don't have that kind of a budget, you're going to be generally working at these things slowly. So having grid power helps in the process of getting closer to being completely off-grid, because you're not having to worry about trying to run a freezer or how to clean your laundry, things like that. And it also helps with the building phase, being able to charge and power tools while building. So Caleb, when building an off-grid homestead, why would you recommend starting out on-grid when you don't have the finances to get everything set up all at once and really quickly? So when we first started out here on this homestead, we just built a solar system. We did not get grid power, and over time, having that solar system, because we weren't able to afford to get a really big solar system, even though we haven't been using crazy amounts of power or anything like that, when it gets cloudy for a decent bit of time, we end up having to start a generator in order to keep our house powered. And the generator takes fuel, which comes from the grid. And we've also had to buy multiple generators and repair generators, and those are not produced on this homestead either. So it's almost been like we've been on the grid as far as paying for power through a generator, but it hasn't been as easy as just being on the grid from the beginning. And as I already mentioned kind of a little bit before, being on grid allows a lot of things to be easier, like having a washing machine, freezer, different things like that. But if you are on grid when you start, but you're hoping to get off grid, you're going to want to keep off grid in mind. So you're not going to be relying on a whole bunch of things that take power that you wouldn't be able to have in an off grid situation. And step 3 will be making sure you have good access to water for you and for any animals you may get a little bit later.
When we first moved on to our bare land, I was a baby, so I don't remember this, but I've been told that my dad pumped water out of that spring. As you can see, it's a little bit dry, so we're really thankful for our spring, but it doesn't give us water all the time. So next we set up rainwater catchment tanks, and those were great until we got cows. Do you know how much cows drink? Gallons and gallons, because I carry them every day. So next we had to get a solar well. Now we have all the water that we need, but it does take a good bit of work to get all the hoses everywhere we need. So we're working on getting water systems in place from the well. The well only works when it's sunny, so we do eventually want to put a hand pump on it. The moral of the story is, when it comes to water, you want redundancy.
When it comes to water sources on the homestead, you want to make sure that you have backups, even for your backups, if you can. The more water sources you have, within reason obviously, the better. So in the case of our spring here, though it is pretty dry right now, thankfully it's only like this for a little while and it'll start flowing good again. Alright, so now we are on step 4, which now we're starting to think about clearing. So clearing for infrastructure, things like housing or barn, shop, things like that. Alright, Mama, so what would you say are some things you could think about when getting ready to clear land?
Well, first I'll say that I have very limited experience in this, so there's probably people out there that have a lot more experience and could chime in the comments below to give some ideas on this. But from what I've seen over the past years of getting this land ready and then our 3 boys clearing their plots, I think it's definitely best to hire a professional to be able to do the work, because doing it by hand is super labor intensive and long. So finding a professional that can just come in and get it done in a day is fantastic. An exception to that might be if you already have experience on machines and you have maybe a good friend or neighbor who could loan you one or let you use one for really cheap, because they are expensive to rent. And then I would say you want to find somebody who's got a machine as close to your plot or your land as possible, so they don't have to travel as far. That's really helpful. And have a plan before they get there. That way when they do get there, you won't be wasting any of their time in order to figure things out. So what I mean by that is be thinking ahead of time about where you want everything to be located. So where's your house and where is your wood storage going to go? If you're doing a composting toilet, where do you want your compost area to be? Where do you want your gardens? Just all the things. If you can have a map kind of laid out with your basic plan of where you want everything, that'll be super helpful, because the machine workers are going to probably have a lot of questions for you. They're going to want to know about where water drainage needs to go. They're going to want to know what you want them to do with wood that could potentially be used for firewood, and where do you want the scrap wood. They're going to possibly have topsoil, and where do you want that topsoil put. If you've got a lot of clay like we do, then you may have extra clay soil that needs to be put somewhere. So the more you have planned out and thought ahead of time, the quicker it'll go once those machine workers get there, and they'll be able to do just a whole lot really quickly. And it'll save you a lot of money in the long run. And also something else that we just recently learned is that when you're looking for somebody who runs machines to do the work for you, you might want to ask if they're open to you giving them kind of smaller projects whenever they have a moment where they're on pause waiting for another machine to do something. We were able to do that with this last crew that came, and they did an amazing job of keeping all of the machines running almost non-stop, because we had little projects planned for them just in case they had extra time. So that was wonderful. And a couple examples of some littler projects that we had done We had them bring topsoil directly into our future garden spaces. We had a little bit of pasture cleared. They're really good at moving trees around, moving large piles. There's just so many different things. And during your time of setting up access, if you didn't maybe provide enough space for larger trailers and vehicles to come in and turn around, you could have them kind of expand your access a little bit and make some turnaround places. Oh, and then parking pads. That's sometimes kind of an afterthought, but that's something else that was done. Josh had them put in a parking pad next to his house pad. So there's lots of different things they can do really quickly. It's amazing what the machines can do. And if you just have a list of things ready, then hopefully they can do even more than you thought they would be able to.
And the most important thing with all of these steps in starting an off-grid homestead is to pray and seek the Father. In regards to clearing and setting up a pad for housing, a cool kind of little testimony is when machine workers were here, we ended up having lots of little things for them to do and kind of gave them some extra jobs to do. They were pretty skeptical as to whether or not they could finish it. They were saying it would probably take an extra day than they had originally bidded for. But it was just really cool, and the Father blessed the whole thing, and they ended up getting everything done in the 2 days that they had originally planned, even though they thought it was probably going to take like another day or so. And one of the guys even said like he was wondering like how did they get so much done. So it's just really cool.
And something else to consider when you're having your house pad cleared and leveled, graveled, all of that, is to think about whether you want to have outdoor patio space. We have 3 sides of our house about 10 feet out on all those sides covered with patio, and that has been such a blessing living off grid. I've got space for hanging the laundry if it's raining. I've got space for an outside kitchen. We've got space for our generator and propane tanks, and lots of space for curing vegetables, and just there's a lot that goes on outside that we don't want to bring inside, and so it's great to have all that extra covered space around the house. So if you're able to and you have the room to build outside covered patio spaces, I highly recommend it.
Alright, and step 5. Now I know some people may have the finances to be able to put up a house really quickly, all in one go, and if that's the case, that's great, just praise Yah for that. But if you're not able to put up a house really quickly, all in one go, and you're going to need to be kind of gathering materials over time and slowly building, then we would actually recommend building some sort of a storage shed or shop, a place where you can put the materials that you want to keep nicer for your house in, and also a place to be able to store any tools or equipment you're using on the house build and the homestead. And even for the people who are able to put up a house really quickly all in one go, you're going to still want to be able to build a shop or a shed or even a barn to store equipment and tools in. Alright Nate, so why would you say it's important to build a shed or a shop for storage before building a house when you're doing things slowly and not able to put up a house right away?
Well, because that means you can slowly gather materials and they won't go bad over time. As if they're just out in the weather or covered by a tarp, they'll still warp much easier, maybe even get rotten in some places because of ants or termites or something. Whereas a shed keeps it all safe and organized. And then also I need a place to store all my tools.
Nice. Alrighty Josh, so what have you been up to up here?
Well, I've been working on building a shop. It's been quite a bit of fun, a good learning experience for sure. I've almost got it framed in and ready for putting metal siding on it. Almost there. Me and Nathan did the first window frame today. That was fun.
Cool, that's exciting.
Yep. already gotten the walls framed, the rafters up, and today I was able to put some house wrap and siding on.
Hopefully this video has been a blessing to any of you that are just starting a homestead or thinking about just getting started with the homestead or going off-grid. Any of you who have been homesteading for a little bit or have off-grid experience, if you could leave any comments down below that could help anyone just getting started, I'm sure that would be a blessing. That's about all we have for you guys today. As always, thank you to our patrons that make these videos possible. We pray blessings over you and yours, and whatever you do, do it with your whole heart.